I can remember the day before the election for president in 1960, the election between Nixon and Kennedy, and I had already determined not to vote because I couldn't see any difference between them. And a very good friend of mine said that with Nixon in the White House, Goldwater will have access to him. Barry Goldwater will be able to give him advice, and we will be so much better off than with Kennedy. Well, we got Kennedy, and we saw what happened. A few years later, we got Nixon, and we got wage and price controls, controls on oil and gas production, off the gold standard, devaluation of the dollar. I mean, the whole 9 yards. It was great society, too. So what good would it have done to elect Richard Nixon back in 1960? So Stephen Moore winds up saying, in sum, California can't afford another 20 minutes, let alone 3 more years of the bankrupting policies of the Davis-Bustamante tenure. They must be terminated. And here we have the crucial point. Yes, standing completely on principle, one would not vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger. But you have to be practical. And therein lies the rub. And the rub is that trying to be practical is not only unprincipled, it is the most impractical thing you can do. Because by voting for the lesser of two evils, or what you perceive to be the lesser of two evils, you wind up with evil and you convince the powers that be that they don't ever have to offer you anything but evil in order to get your vote. And we have seen it over and over and over again. And people wonder why the Republican Party keeps moving more and more and more towards big government. It's because you keep rewarding them. Every time they hand you somebody like George W. Bush or Robert Dole or Dwight Eisenhower or Richard Nixon, you vote for them. And as long as you're going to vote for them anyway, they will never give you anybody but Arnold Schwarzenegger or George W. Bush. Is it so long ago, the year 2000, that we cannot remember that we had to vote for Bush because anything would be better than Gore? We couldn't stand another 4 years of a Democrat in the White House. Well, we got Bush. And what we got, of course, was bigger and bigger government, a bigger role for the federal government in education, a bigger role for the federal government in health care, a bigger role for the federal government in welfare, and on and on and on. And, of course, if somebody tries to excuse all this and point out, well, there are ways that Bush is much better than Gore would have been. Bush, for instance, has renounced the Kyoto Treaty, the environmental treaty that would have imposed strict controls on the U.S. economy. Well, did anybody notice that the Senate, before Bush even got into office, the Senate had already rejected the treaty unanimously? There was never any danger of that treaty being implemented, and so Bush was completely safe in renouncing it because he wouldn't lose votes from either side as a result of it because it was a non-entity. He said we needed to take steps to privatize Social Security. Well, his program, of course, for that is much too little, much too late, and is not really privatizing at all, but he hasn't even proposed anything to Congress yet. So scratch that one off, too. So he's coming out for same-sex marriage, coming out against same-sex marriage. Big deal. The Constitution doesn't give the federal government the right to define marriage between any two people or any two living things on the face of the earth. That is no business of the federal government, and we're supposed to be thankful that Bush is in the White House? Well, he's a good Christian. Well, Bill Clinton used to carry his Bible to church every week. He was a good Christian, too, at least as far as any profession was made, and all we know about Bush is what he chooses to tell us. So we try to be practical, and all we get in exchange for that practicality is the most impractical results, which are bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger government.